The shrink wrap command is used to create a simplified version of your 3D model. This can be useful if you'd like to protect your intellectual property when sending your model to suppliers and customers, for example. It can also be useful to make your model easier to work with if it's unnecessarily complicated for the needs you have at that time. For example, if you have an engine which is filled with many complicated parts, but you're just trying to mount that engine to some other assembly, you may not actually need to work with all of the internal parts of that engine. So you could perform a shrink wrap operation on the engine to remove all of those internal parts and just keep the external mounting points. And that way you'll have a much smaller and easier file to work with for the engine. In this example, I'm going to do a shrink wrap on this assembly here. I'll click on the shrink wrap command, and now you can see the shrink wrap options here on the left. It's worth noting that these options probably look more complicated than they are. When going through each one, they're actually quite easy to understand. The first option here is to select the parts that we definitely like to keep in our final simplified model. In this case, I'm going to choose these green parts. So those parts will be kept unchanged in our final output. The next option here is to choose the parts that we'd like to discard. We can also check to automatically select similar parts if we'd like to, but I'm going to leave that unchecked for now. And I'm going to select these 3 blue parts to discard from our final output. The next option here is to automatically convert parts into simple blocks. This will essentially take the boundary conditions of the part and create a simple block with no holes or anything. So in this example, I'm going to select these plates. These plates have tabs on the outside and also a hole in the center. When they're turned into blocks, it'll take the furthest out it can go in each direction and turn it into a simplified block. And of course, remove that hole in the center as well. The next option, and likely one of the most important options, is to select faces to keep in the final output. This is important when you have holes that you'd like to keep as mounting holes, for example. In this case, I'm going to zoom in and select this hole here. As you can see, these holes have automatically been selected and highlighted blue. That's because they have an equal radius, and we have this option here checked to automatically select holes with an equal radius. The other option we have here is to automatically select concentric faces as well. I'm going to zoom in and select this hole too, and as you can see, those ones have been automatically selected as well. And now I'm going to go in and select this hole here. Now, as you can see, it may be hard to select that face because it's covered by this first part. So to select it, we'll zoom in to where the face approximately is, then press Ctrl-Alt and then select. So hold down Ctrl-Alt on the keyboard and select. And now you'll get an option to select other items behind where the mouse is. So in this case, I'm going to select this second face here. Now with that selected, this concentric face here has automatically been selected to keep as well. The next option we have is to discard parts below or equal to a certain size. We can either use a measurement in, like we have here, in a certain dimension. So we can say, okay, we want all holes below 100 millimeters to be removed, for example. Or we can use a percentage, so all holes below 30% can be removed. In this case, though, I'll leave it as millimeters, but I'm going to leave it at 0 and not worry about that one. The next option we have here is for hole patching. This will essentially patch holes in our parts to simplify them. We can choose to patch all holes, or none, or a range. So you can again choose to, for example, patch all holes below 100 millimeters. Instead of discarding all parts below 100 millimeters, we're going to patch all holes below 100 millimeters. And again, we can choose to use percentage there if we'd like to, with the percentage option here. In this case, I'm going to patch all holes, and I'm going to click on Show Preview. And now you can see a red preview of the holes which will be deleted. If we zoom into this extrusion, you'll see that pockets are also included. So these pockets in the extrusion will automatically get deleted as well. to simplify that into close to a simple rectangular part there. It's worth noting that if we wanted to keep those pockets there, we could simply select those as faces to keep, or we could select the entire part as a part that we'd like to keep the same. Next, we have a few final options here, which we'll go through. We can remove invisible parts. In this case, there aren't really any invisible parts here. But in some examples, like the engine example I mentioned earlier, you may have many parts inside the engine which are actually invisible and hard to kind of select. So this option allows you to remove anything that you can't see from the outside. The next option we have here is to combine the output into a single part. So that will combine the assembly just into one part when it goes into the simple model, instead of being multiple individual parts. I'm going to leave that unselected. We can choose to link to the original file. This is useful because later on in our original file, we can actually edit that shrink wrap. So if the parts are linked, it means we can have our shrink wrap file. So we've got two separate files, a simple model and the main model. And we can go in and change our main model and tell that model to also update the shrink wrap model for us. So I'll leave that one selected. And we can also choose to create a shell of the model on the output, which will turn the solid model into a surface model when it's outputted. In this case, we'll leave that unchecked as well. And I'm also going to leave Keep Saved File open. Then I'll hit OK. And the system will go through and perform the shrink wrap operation. And it will ask me to then save the simplified file. You can see it's the same file name with _simple added to the end. Now we have a dialog showing us what has happened in our shrink wrap operation. So we've removed 0 parts, we've discarded 0 parts, or 0 invisible and 0 undersized. We've kept 6 selected parts unsimplified, we've discarded 3 selected parts, they were the blue ones. We've created 2 box parts, they were the yellow ones there, and the final file size has been reduced by 72%. Now I'll click OK, and that will then open up our shrink wrap model. And now you can see the final output. So if we have a look at the extrusion, this is a good example of those items being removed there. And other big holes and things have been removed here as well. These plates have been turned into simple blocks. And those blue items have been removed. Now if we go into our shrink wrap example model here, and we just close that one down, and I'm going to say yes, we want to save that. And then we open that one up again. You can see now that we open it up again, we actually have a link to our simplified version. And we can right click on this and edit the shrink wrap. So if we make a change, for example here, let's go ahead and make a change to this model. I'm going to just do something simple, maybe paint this red. Of course, it doesn't have to just be a color change, it can be a real model change too. And then I'm going to right click and select Edit Shrink Wrap. Now this will show us the selection that we made previously, which is useful, and we can customize that if we'd like to. I'm going to leave it as is. Simply hit OK. That will go through and re-perform the shrink wrap operation and then save it to that file. So now you can see this file has been updated and the parts are now red. That's how to use the shrink wrap command.